My name is Tessa Calhoun. I am 65 years old. Retirement from decades of nursing left me with steady hands and a quieter heart. But it did not dull the vigilance that had kept patients alive through sleepless nights and emergency wards. Today, I carried that awareness through Los Angeles International Airport, blending into the hum of travelers and the clicking of luggage wheels across polished floors. I was flying to Boston to surprise my mother, who had recently recovered from heart surgery. She had spent weeks insisting that hearing my voice helped her heal faster. I pictured her frail yet determined in the hospital bed, eyes lighting up whenever I called. And a soft warmth eased the tension in my shoulders as I maneuvered my carry-on through the crowds. The terminal smelled of coffee and jet fuel, a strange comfort that reminded me of years spent moving between hospitals. Children pressed their faces to the windows, watching planes taxi and engines roar to life. Business travelers tapped away on laptops, earbuds in, absorbed in their own worlds. I smiled at the ordinary rhythm and whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for routine, for stability, for life's unnoticed moments. Approaching my gate, I noticed the flight attendants preparing for boarding, rehearsed smiles in place, movements precise and practiced. One attendant caught my attention. Her name tag read Alyssa, and her eyes scanned the crowd with sharp attentiveness. Like a nurse watching subtle signs in a patient's pulse, I took a deep breath, adjusted my bag over my shoulder, and stepped onto the jet bridge. The familiar scent of the aircraft greeted me along with the low hum of engines and murmurs of passengers finding seats. I stowed my bag, settled into the aisle seat near the middle of the plane, and buckled my seatbelt, unaware that the ordinary calm of this flight was about to fracture. From the galley, a movement caught my eye. Alyssa paused, glanced in my direction, and for a heartbeat, our eyes met. Then she turned away, continuing her preparation as if nothing had happened. I did not yet understand that this fleeting glance marked the moment my life would veer toward the unexpected. The hum of the engines and the soft murmur of passengers settling into their seats had barely begun to lull me into routine when a movement at the edge of my vision caught my attention. Alyssa, the flight attendant I had noticed on the jet bridge, was making her way down the aisle. Her smile was practiced, polite, but her eyes told a different story. They flicked toward me once, and then, as if sensing my gaze, she turned quickly, continuing her path toward the rear of the plane. Moments later, I felt a slight brush against my arm, my head tilted down. And there it was, a napkin, delicately placed on my tray. No one else seemed to notice. The words, scrawled hastily in ink that smudged slightly under her trembling fingers, read, "Pretend you're sick. You can't stay on this plane any longer." I stared at the note, my fingers hovering over the edge of the tray, unable to fully comprehend what I was seeing. Alyssa leaned closer, lowering her voice to a whisper that seemed almost inaudible over the cabin noise. "Please, I'm begging you." Her eyes locked on mine for a brief second. Pure urgency. Stark fear, none of the polite calm expected of a flight attendant. Her expression left no room for humor, no hint of a practical joke. It was as if she had seen something I could not, something I needed to believe immediately. I sat frozen, the napkin trembling slightly beneath my fingertips. My mind raced with explanations, each one more improbable than the last. Perhaps it was a prank. Someone filming a social experiment, testing reactions of unsuspecting passengers. Maybe it had been slipped to me by mistake, meant for someone else entirely, or perhaps I was imagining the intensity of her gaze, over-interpreting the hurried ink on paper. Across the aisle, a man in a black jacket shifted nervously, opening the overhead compartment twice as if unsure what to do. Behind him, a teenager clutched his backpack to his chest, rocking slightly in his seat. Their movements seemed inconsequential, ordinary, but now every small gesture flickered across my mind like warning signals. My fingers tightened around the napkin, and my pulse quickened. I glanced subtly toward Alyssa. She was standing near the galley, straight-backed, eyes darting not to luggage, but to specific passengers further down the aisle. There was no casualness in her stance. She was tense, prepared, alert. For a moment, I considered discarding the note, tucking it away as a curiosity, but then her gaze flicked back toward me, raw and piercing. The fear I had dismissed as her own anxiety suddenly felt directed at me. A warning anchored in reality. My breathing grew shallow. The ordinary cabin sounds laughter, the scrape of a drink cart. The distant hum of engines faded into the background. All that remained was the napkin, its words echoing in my mind. "Pretend you're sick. You can't stay on this plane any longer." I had no idea what danger waited beyond my seat. No sense of how imminent it might be. My instincts screamed. My mind faltered. One truth, undeniable and immediate, pressed against every rational thought. This was no ordinary warning, and somehow I had become the person it concerned most. I tucked the napkin slightly under my tray, my hands trembling despite my best effort to remain composed. Alyssa continued down the aisle, pretending to check seatbelts and overhead bins. But I knew she was watching, guiding, waiting for a decision I was only beginning to realize I had to make. I tried to steady my breathing, forcing my hands to relax as they rested on the tray before me. The napkin still lay there, its words pulsing in my mind like a silent alarm. I glanced around the cabin, attempting to anchor myself in the ordinary, yet every detail now seemed charged with subtle tension. Across the aisle, the man in the black jacket shifted again, his movements deliberate yet unnerving. He opened the overhead compartment twice without retrieving anything, his eyes darting toward the cockpit, then back to the cabin, as if anticipating an unseen signal. I traced the lines of his face, trying to find reassurance in familiarity, but there was none. Something about his calm, measured posture felt deliberate, like a predator waiting, and I could not ignore the chill crawling up my spine. Behind him, a teenager gripped his backpack tightly against his chest, shoulders hunched, eyes wide. He muttered under his breath, words barely audible. "I can't do this. I can't do this." Each repetition trembled with a fear I could feel, not the usual anxiety of flying, but something deeper, an awareness of being trapped in a situation beyond control. My stomach tightened. I wanted to reach out, to say something reassuring, yet I knew the wrong words might draw unwanted attention. Even the overhead bins above the first-class cabin felt off. Yellow zip ties secured them, a detail I remembered from a security briefing years ago used in emergencies to prevent tampering. My pulse quickened. Sealed compartments, tense passengers, a napkin warning. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle I was only beginning to glimpse. Alyssa appeared again, her presence barely noticeable to the other passengers. She moved slowly down the aisle, pretending to check seatbelts, her hands brushing lightly across the seats. Her gaze, however, did not waver from the cabin. She was alert, scanning, measuring, aware of details no one else seemed to register. My eyes met hers briefly, and the urgency in them sank deep into my chest. She was not watching for courtesy or efficiency. She was watching for danger, and I was at its center. I shifted in my seat, attempting to appear casual as my mind raced. Every instinct, honed from years of nursing and crisis management, told me that the ordinary calm of the flight was a fragile veil. Small cues, a tapping foot, a hand on a briefcase, a rigid posture now felt amplified, imbued with intent I could not yet name. The cabin remained deceptively quiet, passengers murmuring softly, unaware of the undercurrent of tension threading through every row. And yet, the napkin's message was unmistakable. My attention was fixed, my senses heightened, and for the first time in decades, I understood the weight of vigilance beyond the hospital walls. Something was coming, something I could not yet define, and I alone had been warned. I sat back in my seat, hands tightening on the armrests as my mind spun in circles. The words on the napkin burned themselves into my consciousness. Pretend you're sick. You can't stay on this plane any longer. I wanted to dismiss them, to fold the paper neatly and act as though it were nothing. Yet every instinct from decades of nursing insisted otherwise. Images of my mother flashed before me, frail in her hospital bed, still tethered to monitors, her voice trembling when she thanked me for calling. I had promised her I would come, a surprise she had been longing for. The thought of abandoning her now, turning back mid-flight for reasons I could not yet articulate, tore at the edges of my resolve. But then came the logic. No other passenger had received a note. No one else seemed aware of anything unusual. Perhaps I had misunderstood, overreacted. Maybe Alyssa's fear was misdirected, perhaps meant for someone else entirely. A sense of absurdity fought against the gnawing anxiety that had settled in my chest. My mind tried to argue, you are 65. You are capable. You are calm. This is probably nothing. Yet the subtle cues around the cabin refused to let me ignore reality. The man in the black jacket continued to sit with an unnatural stillness, his gaze shifting in measured sweeps. The teenager's murmured repetition of "I can't do this" lingered like a warning in the air. Even the yellow zip ties sealing the overhead bins screamed of containment, of precaution. Each piece pulled my attention taut, threading together a picture that my rational mind was still reluctant to accept. I flexed my fingers against the napkin, heart pounding with hesitation. My life had been built on vigilance and decisive action. I had saved patients with irregular heartbeats, stabilized those teetering on the edge, and comforted families through moments no one else could bear. Yet now, in the quiet of this ordinary flight, I felt powerless, suspended between disbelief and instinct. Every second stretched as the hum of the engines underscored the tension. I caught Alyssa's eyes once more as she passed. The faintest nod or glance impossible to decipher. My pulse surged. The thought of remaining in my seat, doing nothing, felt heavier with each heartbeat. The ordinary boundaries of my life, the routines and predictability I relied on, no longer applied. And in that suspended moment, the decision crystallized, not fully conscious, not fully rational, but anchored in the same clarity that had guided me through decades of nursing hesitation, might be the deadliest choice of all. The cabin had settled into what should have been a quiet rhythm. Yet every movement now felt deliberate, every glance charged with meaning. The man in the black jacket shifted again, not with the casual discomfort of a long flight, but with a meticulous precision that made my skin prickle. His eyes flicked repeatedly toward the cockpit, then swept across the aisle, scanning faces as if confirming an invisible checklist. Behind him, the teenager gripped his backpack tighter, shoulders rigid, lips moving in whispered, urgent repetition. I can't do this. I can't do this. Can't do. His panic was not the common tremor of fear overflying. It carried a weight, a desperation born of something far darker. I could feel it in my chest, a chill that spread beneath the surface calm of the other passengers. Even the woman in the business suit seemed off. She tapped her foot with frantic precision, glancing constantly toward the front of the plane, her hand occasionally reaching into her purse as if retrieving and replacing some unseen object. The subtle energy in the cabin shifted, invisible yet palpable, like a storm gathering beneath still skies. Alyssa appeared once more, moving down the aisle with a deliberate, slow gait. Her hands touched seatbelts and overhead compartments as if performing routine checks, but her gaze never strayed from the cabin. She was alert, calculating, measuring. The urgency she carried was impossible to miss if you were paying attention, but most passengers, absorbed in their own worlds, would have missed it entirely. My pulse accelerated, each small signal the man's unnerving composure. The teenager's whispered panic. The restrained tension of the businesswoman threaded together into a web I could no longer ignore. Years of nursing, of reading subtle signs of distress in patients and family members, taught me to trust these instincts. This was danger, though I did not yet know its shape. Alyssa paused briefly at my row, eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second. There was no doubt now. She was warning me. Her subtle nod, her careful placement of hands. Every small gesture communicated urgency without words. My fingers brushed the napkin again. The message clear action was required, and hesitation could be deadly. I exhaled, slowly, trying to ground myself. The engine's hum and the murmurs of the cabin felt distant, almost irrelevant, as adrenaline sharpened my senses. The ordinary flight I had expected had vanished. Now, every second carried weight. Every passenger might be a clue, a threat, or both. A quiet determination edged into the fear that had gripped me. The warning could not be ignored. My instincts, honed over decades of tending to the frail and the dying, screamed at me to act. But the question that anchored itself in my mind, relentless and urgent, was simple. Was it too late? Or was I still safe enough to do what had to be done? My hands lingered over the napkin. The ink blurred slightly where my fingers had pressed. But the words remained sharp and undeniable. Pretend you're sick. You can't stay on this plane any longer. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to follow the only person in the cabin whose urgency I trusted. And yet, the weight of disbelief anchored me momentarily in my seat. The man in the black jacket shifted again, his calm, deliberate movements twisting into something predatory. The teenager's muttered whispers reached my ears like distant echoes. I can't do this. I can't do this. Their panic was real, unfiltered, and it gnawed at the edges of my hesitation. I knew from years of nursing how quickly situations could spiral out of control if hesitation remained. Alyssa appeared beside me once more, crouching slightly to adjust a seatbelt, as though tending to a passenger. Yet her eyes never left the aisle. She leaned closer, brushing her hand lightly on my arm, not in comfort, but in guidance. Follow me if you want to live. Her gaze seemed to say. I swallowed hard, heart hammering, and felt the thin line between reason and instinct blur. I unbuckled my seatbelt, every motion deliberate, careful not to alert the wrong eyes. The cabin hummed with muted conversations, unaware of the tension threading through every row. My legs shook as I stood, and passengers glanced my way, irritation and curiosity mingling on their faces. I ignored them, focusing on Alyssa, who had started moving down the aisle again. Each step I took was measured. My mind ran through scenarios, assessing risk like I had done for decades with fragile patients. Yet none of my experience had prepared me for this. The ordinary logic of life, the comfort of familiar routines, the reassurance of predictable outcomes had evaporated. I was navigating a minefield without knowing where the next danger might lie. Alyssa guided me toward the front of the plane, her hand steady on my arm, her composure carefully measured to avoid alarming others. I could feel the weight of her presence, the subtle authority in her movements, and I trusted it despite the adrenaline pulsing through me. The passengers around us remained unaware, but the undercurrent of tension was tangible, vibrating in the air like a low, silent hum. As we passed the rows of anxious travelers, my internal struggle settled into a tense rhythm. Fear and reason collided, each heartbeat a reminder that the wrong choice could be fatal. Yet instinct overpowered doubt. I followed Alyssa, step by step, through the cabin that had once felt ordinary but now pulsed with peril. And as we neared the galley, where her gaze swept the cabin once more, I understood fully that my survival depended entirely on this decision. The ordinary flight was gone. I had chosen, and there was no turning back. We reached the galley, and Alyssa guided me to a jump seat near the exit door. Her hand remained firm on my arm, her voice low but insistent. Do not look back. Someone is watching you. Your seat was not assigned by accident. My stomach churned, adrenaline tightening every muscle. The ordinary hum of the cabin had vanished, replaced by a tension that felt alive, almost tangible. Through the small curtain that divided the galley from first class, I caught glimpses of movement. Two uniformed federal air marshals emerged quietly, their presence unnoticed by other passengers. Alyssa's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I understood. This was no random warning. My seat, 14C, had been carefully chosen by someone with lethal intent. The target had not been me. It had been a federal whistleblower, a person I had never met, whose life had been threatened in an act disguised as an accident. My breath hitched. I realized how close I had come. Had Alyssa not noticed the switch? Had she dismissed her instincts even for a single minute? I would have been sitting directly above a live, wired, explosive device. The thought made my hands tremble. Alyssa leaned closer, whispering, "You were never supposed to be in danger. I am an undercover agent." I saw the signs and acted. You are alive because of that choice. Relief washed over me in a wave, mingled with awe. The intricate choreography of security personnel, agents, and flight attendants unfolded silently around us. Passengers remained largely unaware, but the device had been secured, neutralized, and the perpetrators carefully monitored and restrained would face justice. I sank into the jump seat, heart still racing, trying to process the scale of what had been prevented. My ordinary flight, meant only to bring me to my mother, had almost ended in catastrophe. Every glance at Alyssa reminded me that her intuition, her courage, had saved not only my life but potentially hundreds of others on the flight. And as I absorbed the enormity of the moment, the cabin slowly returning to calm, I could not stop thinking how close I had been to death and how meticulously orchestrated the attack had been. The cabin was quiet now, the hum of engines replaced by murmurs of relief and hushed conversations. I remained seated for a moment, letting the weight of what had just occurred settle into my chest. Alyssa approached, no longer in the measured guise of a flight attendant, but as the agent she truly was. Her steady gaze met mine, and I felt the enormity of her choice to act instinctively, to trust her gut, and to place my safety above routine. Later, on the jet bridge, I saw my mother waiting, tears in her eyes as she embraced me. My sister clutched my arm, sobbing softly, relief etched into every line of her face. The ordinary journey that had begun as a simple visit had transformed into a confrontation with danger I could never have imagined. I reflected on decades of nursing, on instincts honed by years of life and death decisions. Yet today, for the first time, I had relied entirely on someone else's judgment, and it had saved me. Vigilance, intuition, courage, they were not abstract qualities. They were lifelines, tangible and immediate. As we left the airport, I carried a renewed sense of gratitude and awareness. Every choice, every subtle warning could hold the power to protect life. I would never ignore that again.